to Solving for the Undefined podcast. I'm your host, Johanna, founder of Miss Kuiper's Classroom, the place that equips teachers in creating a healthy math classroom where students can thrive, no matter their academic abilities. But it's not always about the numbers, and that's why I'm here, bringing you the formulas to solve your problems, math and otherwise, plus strategies on cultivating that necessary math mindset. And that's what you can count on. Hello, welcome back. I'm so excited to be back after a few weeks off. I decided to take some time after school ended to relax, refill my cup, and get ready for summer school. But in my time away, I have decided that I'm going to start a new series on my podcast. I wanted it to be about preparing for the first days of school, but maybe not in the way that you think. So I was inspired by the book Mathematical Mindsets by Joe Bowler. If you're a math teacher, you probably have heard this book before, and if not, I'm so excited to share with you. So for this first episode, I wanted to talk about how we learn. I think as teachers, it's very important for us to understand how our brain works, so that way we understand how our students are actually neurophysically, that's probably not a word, are actually learning. Because if we are not presenting material in a way that students can actually learn from, we're doing this whole teacher thing wrong. So today I'm going to tell you all about learning. And with this, I did a lot of research before coming to you with this podcast episode. So everything that I'm going to be saying today is been actually researched. I looked at a lot of research papers. I looked at a lot of experts. And I will have all the links to the things that I looked at in the show notes on my website. So if you want to check out something too, you're more than welcome to. All right. So first thing I want to say is there's no such thing as a math person. What I mean by this is our brain is not genetically influenced to be good at math or to not be good at math. Our math ability is not genetically influenced. No one is born knowing math or lacking the ability to learn math. Our brain grows and adapts and changes based on our experiences, the expectations put upon us, and our growth mindset. And our brain can change in as little as 3 weeks. For some people it takes longer, but 3 weeks is about how long it takes for our brain to change, at least the neural pathways. Everyone, given the right experiences, can be successful at math, or successful at anything, really. Learning itself changes the way our brain works. It changes the physical structure of our brain. I used to think when I was little, that when we, I mean like 3rd grade, that when we learned something, a new wrinkle formed in our brain. And that if you had a wrinkly brain, that meant you were very smart and you learned lots of things. Which, on the surface level, is incorrect. Our brain does not create a new wrinkle every time we learn something. But a new neural pathway is formed. So this is a connection between two places in our brain. There's a neural pathway that makes a connection. Think of it as like your brain is the woods, and you want to go from point A to point B inside the woods. Well, the first time you go through it, you're pioneering your way through the forest. It's going to be a little hard the first time because there's no path. You're literally trying to take your compass and guide yourself to this other point. But the more often you do this path, the more understanding you have of what left you should take, what tree you should go around, all of that. So this actually changes the structure of our brain, and this is what we call neuroplasticity. And there are 2 ways our brain does this connection forming. The first one is in early childhood. We have a bunch of like synapses floating around in our brain. I hope I said that right. And we're forming connections as we do things. We're basically learning how to be a human. And the second time in our life that we create these connections is through experience. And the more we practice this thing, whatever it is, whether it's driving a car, doing multiplication, the stronger those connections become. And within our brain, there's 2 different modes that our brain works in. The first one is called focus mode, and the second is relaxed mode. Relaxed mode is where our brain normally is. I don't have a percentage. I think it was 83%. I don't know. It's somewhere in my notes. Our brain lives in default or relaxed mode. Focus mode is actually where we're actively engaged or learning with an activity. Also, it's considered task-oriented mode. The relaxed or default mode is when our brain is taking a break from focusing on an activity or learning to do something fun or physical. And while it may not seem like it, this is an extremely important part of the learning process. The focus mode takes thoughts along previously made neural pathways. So, going back to that woods analogy, when we're focusing, our brain is going to go from point A to point B. It's working on one specific circuit in your brain. If the concept has no connection point, so there's nothing that you've already created, or there's no peripheral, I know there's an academic word for this and that's not coming to me, but if there's no peripheral activity or understanding, the brain isn't going to be able to make those connections because so much is being fired into your brain because you are focused. But when you enter into relaxed mode, aka taking a brain break, or what I like to call as a synap, get it? It's a nap, but it's like a synap because, yeah. In the background, while you're doing a default task, whether it's walking, cooking dinner, talking with a friend, anything, in the background, your brain is making those new connections. Because you're relaxed, you're not focused, this idea can basically bounce around in your brain more effectively than when you're sitting down focusing super hard on a task. This is also where the science behind sleeping on an idea comes into play. There's more science with like actually sleeping and how your brain works, but when your brain has time to unfocus from something, you actually will learn it better than if you continue to focus hard on a task. Your brain works on things in the background. And learning itself takes place when you go back and forth between this focus mode and this relaxed mode. And in the going back and forth between your focus mode and your relaxed mode, this is where we begin to understand a new concept. So say we're learning about the Pythagorean theorem. As we go back and forth between focusing on the Pythagorean theorem and taking our break, this is where the understanding takes place. But understanding, that's not learning. Learning is the practice and the repetition in a variety of circumstances that you truly gain mastery over a subject. And in comes neural chunking. Neural chunking is where we take something and repeat it in the same process over and over, and not in the same way. So in one of the videos I was watching about this neuroscientist talking about neural chunking, she was talking about the idea of when you are learning to back up your car. The first time you do this activity, you're thinking, oh, I have to look in this mirror. Oh, I need to look in the overhead mirror. Oh, I need to look behind me. Is my blinker on? Am I using a backup camera? You're thinking about every little detail that's going into backing up your car. Now, the second time you do that, you're going to have to think about those things less. The third time you do it, you have to think about it less. And eventually, you're doing it without thinking about it. You're chatting with your friend. You have a coffee cup in your hand. You can do this without thinking about it. Now, translating that into a mathematical problem. You're working on a Pythagorean theorem problem. First thing you're going to do is you are going to take your notes and you're going to walk through step by step on how to do this problem. Pythagorean theorem's new. You've never done it before, maybe besides in class. And now you are tasked to do this problem. You're going to follow step by step on what your notes were. Step 1, label the sides of the triangle. Figure out what's a side, what's the hypotenuse. What am I solving for? And then you're going to insert a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Now, where do these go? And every step you take, you're going to have to look back at your notes. What's next? What do I need to do now? Oh, I need to square. Oh, I need to subtract. There's a bunch of steps that you have to take that you're going to constantly have to go back to your notes to look at. Now you go on to the second problem, and you're going to have to look at your notes less. You're starting to understand the process of how the Pythagorean theorem works for a right triangle. This is the neural chunking. One thing she did say in this video, I don't remember her name, but the video will be in the show notes on my website, is it needs to be in a variety of circumstances as well. Doing one thing over and over can be super boring, and this is not where learning takes place. Learning is a social process, meaning there's no learning without emotion. We need emotion to acquire and retain new knowledge. Another neuroscientist I was listening to put it this way. I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to think about a happy moment. Now think about when this moment was. Who were you with? What were you wearing? What was the weather outside? What did it smell like? Your brain remembers these things because it is associated with a positive memory. Our brains remember emotionally charged memories better than boring ones. Positive emotions are tied to our associative memory. And associative memory is defined as the ability to learn and remember the relationship between unrelated items, such as someone's name or the Pythagorean theorem. So this associative memory is what helps us create those connections in our brain. This is also why prerequisite knowledge, that's what I was looking for earlier, is important. Because if we have the prerequisite knowledge for something, our brain can then associate with that and then build upon it. And here's some more mind-blowing information. So information, aka the things that we learn, get processed in two ways. Through our prefrontal cortex, aka the thinking brain, and the automatic brain, that is sometimes called the reactive brain. The reactive brain, it makes up about 83% of your brain. I think that's maybe where I got that 83% from earlier. So when you are stressed, anxious, bored, the automatic brain is what's filtering the information. And when your automatic brain is the one filtering the information, this means you're doing one of three things with the information. You're ignoring it, you're avoiding it, or, the real kicker, fighting against it, causing you to act up. Now, when I read this in one of the articles I read, my brain started jumping around to all the scenarios that I've had with students where they've demonstrated poor behavior. This is probably why. They were stressed, they were anxious, they were frustrated that they didn't understand, or they were just plain bored with the learning taking place. So with this, we need to create positive, creative, brain-friendly atmospheres. And one way to think about this is we need to think about the extrinsic and intrinsic motivation that our students have. If our students are solely relying on extrinsic motivation, like getting a good grade on a test, once they achieve that good grade on a test, they're no longer going to be motivated to learn. They've achieved the thing, they get to move on. But if a student is intrinsically motivated to learn, they're going to be able to motivate themselves throughout life and throughout your class to learn and understand ideas. We need to help our students take ownership of their learning. The fear of failure or making mistakes is what hinders this intrinsic motivation for taking over. Our classrooms need to be a safe place for students to make mistakes and to learn from failure, not for them to be scared of those things. And so, with this idea, we need to make sure that we are modeling that for our students, because our emotions are contagious. Have you heard of mirror neurons? That's why when you're watching like football or an MMA fight and someone gets punched or tackled, you like flinch because your brain is mirroring what it sees. So if we can have a positive attitude about making a mistake and learning from it, or showing that it's not a big deal to get something wrong, as long as we're willing to learn from it, our students are going to see that too. And they're going to then mirror that understanding and take it inside and be like, okay, I can learn and I can take ownership of my learning. So one person put it this way: what you give is what you get. So if you're modeling this for your students are then going to reflect it back to you. All right, that's what I have for you. Episode 1 of this learning series. Quick summary and what our next steps are. Our brain has 2 modes, focused and relaxed mode. Both are important and needed in order for students to retain learning, to be able to then utilize this information. And we need to create in our classrooms a positive, creative, and brain-friendly atmosphere where we are modeling intrinsic motivation to help our students take ownership of their learning. Some next steps for us is to then learn how to apply this in our classroom. So that is what some of the next episodes of this podcast series will be dedicated to. So I will see you next Monday with some more information. Bye! Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. To find all the links and resources to things talked about in this episode, head on over to MissKuipersClassroom.com and click on podcast.